Forced to marry a man who killed 3 wives. That's what they told Clara Hartley the morning she was sold to Silas Blackwood. 3 women in black dresses stood across the street from the church, watching her like vultures. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They just stared, counting down the days until she'd join whatever dark fate had claimed the others. This is the story of how a 19-year-old girl became the richest and most dangerous woman in Colorado. And it starts with a debt, a dying man, and a secret worth killing for. If you want to hear how a forced marriage turned into a war for survival, smash that like button and subscribe, because this tale will take you deep into the wild, ruthless heart of the 1870s frontier. It was 1874 in Silverton, Colorado, a mining town where fortunes were made overnight and lives were lost just as fast. Clara Hartley had lived there her whole life. Her real father, Thomas, died when she was 12. Cholera swept through town and took him in 3 days. Her mother, Sarah, remarried a year later to a man named Vincent Hartley, a smooth-talking gambler who promised stability but delivered nothing but trouble. For 6 years, they barely survived. Sarah took in washing and mending. Clara worked at Brennan's general store for pennies a day. Vincent? He spent his time in saloons, playing cards with money they didn't have, always promising the next big win was coming. Then Sarah got sick. Consumption ate through her lungs like wildfire. The doctor bills piled up faster than snow in January. Vincent borrowed from everyone, the bank, the neighbors, even Reverend Matthews at the church. When Sarah finally died that spring, Clara thought the nightmare was over. She was dead wrong. 2 weeks after the funeral, a man in a black suit came knocking. His name was Luther Pike, and he worked for Morris Keene, the town banker, a man with fingers in every crooked deal from Denver to Santa Fe. "Your stepfather owes $1,200, Pike said, standing in the doorway of their tiny cabin. "Payment's due today." Clara's heart sank. Vincent had vanished 3 days earlier, packed a bag in the dead of night, and rode out without a word. He'd left her alone with debts she never knew existed. "I don't have that kind of money," Clara said, her voice shaking. Pike smiled, the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "Mr. Keene figured as much, but he's a reasonable man. He's willing to forgive the debt, if you agree to a marriage contract." "Marriage? To who?" "Silas Blackwood." The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Everyone in Silverton knew Silas Blackwood. He was the wealthiest rancher in the county, owned thousands of acres in the hills, and kept to himself like a ghost. But that's not why people whispered his name. They whispered because of his wives. 3 of them, all gone. The first one, Elizabeth, left him after a month of marriage. Just disappeared one night. Some said she ran off to California. Others said she couldn't stand looking at his face. The second, Mary, died in childbirth along with the baby. And the third, Anne, was found shot dead on the road to Denver 2 years ago. The killer was never caught. Silas himself was a mystery. He'd come back from the Civil War in 1865, his face half destroyed by fire, his body broken. He walked with a limp, rarely spoke, and when he did come to town, people crossed the street to avoid him. Some said the war had turned him into a monster. Others said he was cursed. And now Clara was being sold to him like livestock. "I won't do it," she said. Pike's smile faded. "Then you'll go to debtor's prison. Or worse. Keene owns the sheriff, the judge, and half the businesses in this town. You've got no family, no money, no options. Sign the contract, or I'll have you arrested by sundown." Clara looked around the cabin, the only home she'd ever known. Her mother's quilt still lay folded on the chair. Her father's Bible sat on the shelf. She had no choice. "When?" she whispered. "Tomorrow, noon, at the church." The next day, Clara stood in front of a cracked mirror, wearing a borrowed white dress that smelled like mothballs. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside, she could hear the church bells ringing. Mrs. Brennan, the store owner's wife, adjusted Clara's veil. "You're a brave girl," she said softly, "braver than most." "I don't feel brave." "Bravery isn't about feeling fearless, child. It's about doing what you must even when you're terrified." Clara walked to the church alone. No family, no friends, just her and the weight of a future she didn't choose. Inside, the pews were half empty. A few townspeople had shown up, not to celebrate, but to gawk. Mayor Thornton sat in the front row next to Chester Vaughn, a railroad man with slicked-back hair and a permanent sneer. Morris Keene stood near the back, arms crossed, watching like he owned her. And at the altar stood Silas Blackwood. Clara's breath caught. He was tall, over 6 feet, and broad-shouldered, but he stood hunched, like the weight of the world pressed down on him. He wore all black. Black coat, black vest, black hat pulled low. His face was turned away, but she could see the scars. The left side of his face looked like melted wax, the skin twisted and discolored. His left eye was clouded white. His right hand gripped a cane. He didn't look at her as she approached. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat and began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Clara barely heard the words. Her heart pounded so loud she thought everyone could hear it. When the Reverend asked if she took Silas as her husband, her voice came out as a whisper. "I do." Silas's response was even quieter. "I do." "You may kiss the bride." Silas turned to her for the first time. His good eye, a deep, tired brown, met hers for just a second. Then he nodded once and walked out of the church without another word. Clara stood there, alone at the altar, a married woman to a man she didn't know. The reception was held at the Silver Spur Saloon, the largest building in town. 50 people showed up, but it felt more like a funeral than a wedding. Clara sat at a corner table in her borrowed dress, untouched cake in front of her. Silas stood at the bar, drinking whiskey in silence. Mayor Thornton kept whispering to Chester Vaughn. Morris Keene watched Clara like a hawk. A woman in a purple dress, someone Clara didn't recognize, kept staring at Silas with something that looked like pity. Then Silas set down his glass and limped to the center of the room. The saloon went silent. He pulled a folded document from inside his coat and cleared his throat. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping metal. "Got an announcement to make." Every eye in the room locked on him. 3 weeks ago, my ranch hands were digging a new well on the north pasture. They hit rock, kept digging, found a gold vein. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Had an assayer come out from Denver. He confirmed it. The vein runs deep, real deep, worth about $2 million. The room exploded into gasps and shouts. Chester Vaughn's face went bright red. Morris Keene stood up so fast his chair fell over. Silas raised his hand for silence. Then he turned to Clara. "Clara Hartley Blackwood. As of today, this ranch and that gold mine are deeded in your name. Not joint property, not mine, yours, sole ownership." He slid the document across the table. Clara's hands trembled as she picked it up. Her name was written in bold black ink. Clara Hartley Blackwood, sole owner of Blackwood Ranch and all mineral rights therein. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Silas leaned down, his scarred face close to hers. "Because I'm dying. Got a bullet lodged in my spine from Gettysburg. Never came out. Doc says I got 3 months left, maybe 4. I got no family, no children, and you're the only person in this town who ever treated me like I was still human." Clara's mind raced. She remembered now, 6 months ago, she'd been walking past Silas's ranch when his horse threw a shoe. He'd been on the ground, struggling to stand, his cane out of reach. Everyone else on the road had crossed to the other side, pretending not to see. Clara had stopped. She'd helped him up, handed him his cane, and asked if he was all right. He'd nodded once and said, "Thank you." That was it. 30 seconds, one small act of kindness. And now he was giving her a fortune. "You're free to annul this marriage tomorrow if you want," Silas said quietly. "But the land and the mine are yours either way. I already filed the deed with the county. It's legal." Chester Vaughn shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "That mine sits on land the railroad's been negotiating for. This is fraud." Mayor Thornton slammed his hand on the bar. Silas, you can't just— I can, and I did, Silas said coldly. It's my land, my gold, and now it's hers. Any of you got a problem with that? Take it up with Judge Harlan in Denver. A woman in the back shrieked, I'm his cousin, his bloodkin. She's got no right. Another man shouted, This is a sham. She's a gold digger. The room erupted into chaos, shouting, accusations, threats. Clara sat frozen, clutching the deed like a lifeline. Silas didn't flinch. He just looked down at her. You gonna be all right, Clara? She didn't know, but she nodded anyway. He turned and walked out of the saloon, his cane tapping against the wooden floor. Clara was left alone, in a room full of wolves. That night, Clara lay awake in the largest bed she'd ever seen, in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Silas's ranch was massive, a 2-story log structure with stone fireplaces, thick rugs, and furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He'd given her the master bedroom and taken a smaller room down the hall. She could hear him coughing through the walls, deep, wet coughs that sounded like his lungs were tearing apart. At dawn, she found him on the front porch, cleaning a rifle. They're coming for you, he said without looking up. Who? All of them. Vaughn wants the land for his railroad. Keene wants the mine. That woman who claimed to be my cousin. She's a liar. I got no living relatives, but she'll try to contest the will anyway. What do I do? Silas set the rifle down and finally looked at her. You fight or you run, but if you run, they'll hunt you down and take everything anyway. At least if you fight, you got a chance. Clara's throat tightened. I don't know how to fight men like that. Then I'll teach you. I got 3 months. Maybe that's enough. Why are you doing this? Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Because I'm tired of watching good people get destroyed by bad ones, and because you deserve better than what this town gave you. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. What do you think really happened to Silas's 3 wives? Was it murder, accidents, or something else? Drop your theory in the comments below. 3 days later, Morris Keene showed up with a lawyer. Clara was in the barn, feeding the horses, when they cornered her. The lawyer was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase. Keene stood behind him, arms crossed. Mrs. Blackwood, the lawyer said smoothly, my name is Howard Finch. I represent Mr. Keene and several other concerned citizens of Silverton. We're here to make you a very generous offer. I'm listening, Clara said, though her stomach twisted. $5,000, cash, today, for the mine. Clara almost laughed. It's worth $2 million. Keene stepped forward. It's worth nothing if you're dead, girl. The barn suddenly felt very small. Finch cleared his throat. What Mr. Keene means is that operating a gold mine requires significant capital, expertise, and manpower. You're a young woman with no experience. Accidents happen in mines all the time. Cave-ins, explosions. It would be tragic if something happened to you. Is that a threat? It's a reality, Keene said coldly. Sell now or you'll lose everything, one way or another. Clara's hand moved toward the pitchfork leaning against the stall. A voice came from the barn entrance. She told you no. Now get off my property. Silas stood silhouetted in the doorway, rifle in hand. Keene's jaw tightened. This isn't your property anymore, Blackwood. It's hers. And she's going to learn real quick that being rich doesn't mean being safe. Leave, Silas said quietly. Before I forget, I'm a civilized man. Finch grabbed his briefcase and hurried out. Keene followed, but he stopped at the door and looked back at Clara. You won't live long enough to spend a dime of that gold, mark my words. That night, someone tried to burn down the barn. Clara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted out of bed, threw on her boots, and ran outside. Flames were already climbing the barn walls. The horses were screaming. Silas was already there, limping toward the fire with a bucket of water. Clara grabbed another bucket from the well and ran. They worked in desperate silence, throwing water, beating back flames with wet blankets, dragging terrified horses out of their stalls. By the time they got the fire under control, the barn was half destroyed. Clara collapsed on the ground, coughing, her hands blistered and black with soot. Silas found a kerosene can hidden in the brush near the barn. "They're not wasting time," he said grimly. "What do I do?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "I can't fight the whole town." Silas crouched down beside her. "You don't fight the whole town. You fight the ones pulling the strings. Vaughn, Keene, maybe Thornton. You cut off the head, the body dies. How? You learn to shoot. You learn to ride. You learn to think like they do, and you find out what they're really afraid of." "What are they afraid of?" Silas looked toward the smoldering barn. "The truth." The next morning, Silas started training Clara. He taught her to shoot first. Handed her a Colt revolver and walked her out to a clearing behind the house. Set up bottles on a fence. "Hold it steady. Both hands. Breathe out when you pull the trigger." Clara's first shot went wide. The second hit the dirt. The third shattered a bottle. "Good," Silas said. "Again." By the end of the week, she could hit 5 bottles in a row. He taught her to ride hard and fast, to reload on horseback, to watch her surroundings. He taught her which men in town could be trusted, almost none, and which ones would sell her out for $1. "You're a target now," he said one evening as they sat on the porch. "Richest woman in Colorado. Every man with a grudge or a scheme is going to come for you. You need to be ready." "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked. "You don't owe me anything." Silas stared out at the mountains. "Maybe I'm trying to make up for the ones I couldn't save." "Your wives." He nodded slowly. "Elizabeth left because she couldn't stand looking at me. I don't blame her. Mary wanted a family. I gave her a grave. And Anne," his voice cracked. "Anne tried to fight them, and they killed her for it." "Who killed her?" "Same people coming for you now." 2 weeks after the wedding, a woman arrived at the ranch. She was older, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face carved from stone. She rode up alone on a black mare, dismounted, and knocked on the door. Clara answered. "I'm Margaret Kane," the woman said. "Silas's third wife was my sister." Clara's blood went cold. Silas appeared behind her. "Maggie!" "Silas." Margaret's eyes were hard. "I heard you got yourself a new wife." "Thought I'd come see if this one's going to end up like Anne." "She won't," Silas said firmly. "That's what you said last time." They sat in the kitchen. Margaret didn't waste words. "My sister Anne married Silas in 1871. She was kind, smart, and too curious for her own good. When she found out about the gold on this land, and yes, there was always gold here, Silas just kept it quiet, she started asking questions. Who owned the mineral rights? Could the railroad claim it? She went to the land office in Denver to verify the deeds. "And?" Clara asked. "She never made it back. Shot in the back on the road outside of town. They said it was bandits, but her money was still in her bag. Her jewelry untouched. It wasn't robbery. It was murder." Silas's jaw clenched. Margaret leaned forward. "Chester Vaughn's railroad wanted this land. Still does." Anne discovered that the original property deed was forged, that Silas's land actually extended 3 miles further east than the county records showed, right through where Vaughn wanted to lay his tracks. Clara's eyes widened. So if the real deed was found, Vaughn would lose everything, millions of dollars in investment, years of planning. He'd be ruined. "Where's the real deed?" Clara asked. Margaret pulled out a folded yellowed letter. "That's the problem. Anne hid it before she died. She knew they were coming for her. She left me this." Clara read the letter aloud. "Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. The deed is safe. When the shadow of the cross touches the stone, the truth will rise. Protect Silas. He's a better man than this town deserves. Anne." Clara read it 3 times. "What does that mean?" Margaret shook her head. "We never figured it out. But if you can, you'll have the power to destroy Vaughn and everyone working with him." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept reading Anne's letter over and over. Shadow of the cross, stone. Truth will rise. At dawn, she saddled a horse and rode into town. There was an old cemetery on the edge of Silverton, a small plot with weathered headstones and a tall stone cross in the center. It was a memorial for soldiers who died in the Civil War. Clara dismounted and stood in front of the cross, watching as the sun climbed higher. The shadow stretched across the ground, long and dark. It pointed directly at a flat stone near the iron fence. Clara's heart raced. She dropped to her knees and started digging with her bare hands. The dirt was hard, packed down by years of rain and snow. Her fingers bled, but she kept digging. 10 inches down, her hand hit something solid, metal. She pulled out a rusted lockbox, no bigger than a book. Inside, a folded deed, signed and notarized, showing that Silas Blackwood's property extended 3 miles east, directly through the railroad's planned route. And beneath it, a letter written in Chester Vaughn's own hand, offering the county clerk $500 to alter the land records. Clara had the proof. She had the weapon. But she also had a target on her back. She rode back to the ranch, the lockbox strapped to her saddle. But when she crested the hill, her stomach dropped. 3 horses were tied outside the house. 3 men stood on the porch. Chester Vaughn, Morris Keene, and Sheriff Dalton, a fat, lazy man who did whatever Keene paid him to do. Silas was on his knees, blood dripping from his mouth. One of Vaughn's men stood behind him, rifle pressed to his head. Clara's hand moved to the revolver on her hip. Vaughn saw her and smiled. There she is, the little thief. I'm not a thief, Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. This land is mine. Not for long. Vaughn nodded to the sheriff. Arrest her, fraud and conspiracy to defraud the county. On what grounds? Clara demanded. On the grounds that Silas Blackwood coerced you into marriage to hide assets from his creditors. We have signed affidavits from witnesses. It was a lie. But Sheriff Dalton moved toward her anyway, hand on his gun. Silas tried to stand. You touch her, Dalton, and I swear— Vaughn's man slammed the rifle butt into Silas's head. He collapsed. Clara pulled her revolver and aimed it at Vaughn. Everyone froze. I've got the real deed, Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. The one Anne Blackwood died protecting. It proves you bribed the county clerk to steal Silas's land. It's over, Vaughn. Vaughn's face went white, then red, then twisted with rage. Shoot her, he hissed to the sheriff. Dalton hesitated. I said shoot her. But before anyone could move, a gunshot cracked through the air. Margaret Kane stood at the tree line, rifle raised. Behind her, a dozen men emerged from the woods. Ranch hands, miners, men who'd worked for Silas over the years. Drop your weapons, Margaret said coldly, or the next shot goes through Vaughn's skull. Vaughn's men looked at each other. Slowly, they lowered their guns. Margaret walked forward, her rifle never wavering. You killed my sister, Vaughn, and you're going to hang for it. The trial lasted a week. Clara presented the deed, the bribe letter, testimony from the land office in Denver. Margaret brought witnesses who'd seen Vaughn's men on the road the day Anne was killed. A miner came forward and admitted Vaughn had paid him to set the barn fire. Vaughn tried everything, bribery, threats, legal tricks. But the evidence was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Morris Keene fled town in the middle of the night and was never seen again. Sheriff Dalton was stripped of his badge and run out of Silverton, and Clara Hartley Blackwood became the legal owner of the largest ranch and richest gold mine in Colorado. But the fight wasn't over. A week after the trial, a man named Jacob Thorne arrived in town. He was tall, handsome, and well-dressed, a lawyer from Denver representing a group of investors who claimed they'd bought shares in Silas's mine years ago. Mrs. Blackwood, Thorne said smoothly, sitting across from her in the ranch house. My clients are prepared to offer you a partnership, 50-50 split. You provide the land, we provide the capital and expertise. I'm not interested, Clara said. Thorne smiled. You should be. Operating a mine is dangerous, expensive work. Without our help, you'll go bankrupt within a year. I'll take my chances. Thorne's smile faded. You're making a mistake. My clients don't take rejection well. Then they can take it up with my lawyer. You don't have a lawyer. She does now. Margaret Kane stepped into the room, a stack of legal documents in her hand. I've been studying law for 3 years, Mr. Thorne, and I've already filed an injunction against your clients. Turns out their shares were purchased with forged documents. You've got 24 hours to leave Colorado, or I'll have you arrested for fraud." Thorne's face went pale. He stood, grabbed his hat, and left without another word. Clara looked at Margaret. "You studied law?" "Had to. After Anne died, I swore I'd never let another woman get destroyed by men like them." Silas's condition worsened. He could barely walk now. The coughing fits lasted longer. Some mornings he couldn't get out of bed, but he refused to stop working. He taught Clara how to manage the ranch, how to negotiate with buyers, how to read contracts and spot lies. "You're going to outlive me by 50 years, he said one evening. "I need to make sure you're ready." "I don't want to talk about you dying," Clara said quietly. "We don't get a choice." She looked at him. This scarred, broken man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because when you helped me that day, you didn't see a monster. You saw a man who needed help, and I realized, maybe I wasn't as far gone as I thought." Tears stung Clara's eyes. "You're not a monster, Silas. You're the best man I've ever known." He smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Then I'll die a lucky man." 3 months after the wedding, Silas Blackwood passed away in his sleep. Clara found him in the morning, lying peacefully in bed, his face finally free of pain. She buried him next to Anne, under the shadow of the stone cross. The whole town came to the funeral, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. They wanted to see what the richest widow in Colorado would do next. Clara stood at the grave, dry-eyed and silent. Margaret stood beside her. "What now?" Margaret asked. Clara looked out at the land. The ranch, the mine, the mountains stretching endlessly into the sky. "Now I build something that lasts." Over the next 10 years, Clara transformed Silverton. She hired miners, paid them fair wages, and made the Blackwood mine the safest and most profitable operation in Colorado. She built a school for children whose parents couldn't afford education. She funded a hospital. She bought out corrupt politicians and replaced them with honest ones. And she never remarried. Men tried, of course. Suitors came from as far as San Francisco, drawn by her wealth and beauty. But Clara turned them all away. "I've already had the only husband worth having," she'd say. She lived to be 73 years old. By the time she died in 1928, she'd become one of the most powerful women in the American West. A legend whispered about in saloons and written about in newspapers. But she never forgot where she came from, or the man who gave her a chance when no one else would. In her will, she left the ranch and mine to Margaret Kane, with instructions to turn it into a foundation for women escaping bad marriages, debt, and abuse. The Blackwood Foundation still exists today, and every year, on the anniversary of Silas's death, someone leaves flowers on his grave. So here's my final question for you. If you were in Clara's position, 19 years old, sold into marriage, suddenly the richest woman in the territory, would you have stayed and fought or taken the money and run? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe, because the Wild West was full of women like Clara Hartley Blackwood, and their stories deserve to be heard.